Hello there, Servrum17 once again. This is my NieR Automata very hard difficulty video walkthrough. This is chapter 6, it is the King of the Forest. So we're in the bunker because we've been tasked to come back here. We spoke to the commander and then it wants us to go to Pascal's village. So I don't know if you have to directly go to Pascal's village or if you can just go towards the area where the forest zone is. But you're not going to see me going to Pascal's village. You know where it is now, and we have the ability to do... can we warp at this point? I don't think we can. But you know where it is, you know how to get there. I don't need to show you that. We've already been there, I've already showed you. So instead, I'm going to show you where we have to go to get to the King of the Forest. Before I can do that though, I'm just talking to this fellow here. And it is a side quest that you can do. It gets you a special sword, I believe, so it's well worth doing. The swords themselves, it's interesting, right? I read the Game Informer review for this game the other day, and they gave it a 7.7, which is the lowest score I've seen for the game. And I agreed with a lot of the guy's criticisms of it. Some of them, not so much. The one thing that he mentioned that I did think was a good point, but at the same time, it doesn't really apply to the players who are going to come to this game for combat, which is the idea of the weapons in this game. There's quite a lot of them, which is true, but there's no real reason to use any of them over any of the others, aside from arbitrary damage sliders and maybe a moveset that you prefer, because they're all very similar. And it's really true. Like, a lot of the big, large swords have the same moveset. The spears have some really interesting looking moves, but kind of all the spears do the same thing. And the short swords are kind of the same. There are slight exceptions here and there, but for the most, they're just palette-swapped versions of the weapons. And the review mentioned how, you know, there's no real need to use the other ones outside of specific circumstances. And he also mentioned repetition, which the gameplay design is repetitious in its nature, but all gameplay design is repetitious. The question is whether or not you like it, and whether or not they do it and distribute it in such a way that you don't realise it's repetitious. So the thing here that I think that he's getting at is when you start 9S's campaign, you play all of 2B's campaign up to a point, and then certain things start to happen differently. But you still do a lot of the same hits. You know, like your favourite band doing a greatest hits tour, doing all the classics. They always do all the classics, don't they? It's just one of those things. You went there looking for an eclectic one off your favourite album, you got the one they always play. Is that repetitious? No, that's just kind of how it works. Some people will find that repetitious because they don't want to hear the classics, but then they don't really understand how live music works. And it's the same here. The idea of calling this repetitious when it comes to like the combat and the way that the quests are shelled out and what you do for the majority of the game, it's about as repetitive as you make it. You know, do you think FIFA's repetitive because you're always playing the same sport? No. You know, it's that weird thing of one person's repetition is another person's passion. And like a good example for me would be something like Dynasty Warriors. I think Dynasty Warriors games and the Muso games and things like that, they're very repetitious in nature. There's a lot of doing the same thing. It's very grind heavy, very farm heavy, things like that. But there are people that love that, and that's perfect for them. So when it comes to a system like this, where character action games are something I personally love, I would never look at this as being repetitive. I see certain aspects of the game as repetitious, like certain hacking sequences, which are really boring and you don't do much and they're just an excuse for exposition. You know, certain story beats and plot beats that you repeat several times, certain recycled bosses, certain recycled things. You could call those repetitive, definitely, but even then I wouldn't really look at it that way, because it's like calling the calm before the storm in Call of Duty repetitive. There's always going to be sequences where you're walking in an area with your squad talking about tertiary plot details, and then everything starts exploding. It's just how it's going to be, because that's the way the game's delivered. So it's an interesting critique that I agree with on some fronts, but I disagree with on others. I was looking for him to say something along the lines of the feeling of escalation in this game happens to the world, happens to the plot, but doesn't really happen to the gameplay. And it's one of those things that I think Platinum have always done really, really well. This idea of escalating stakes and raising the bar for what is at risk. And that never really happened in this game for me when it comes to just the gameplay itself. At the very beginning you fight a Goliath, which is probably like the second biggest enemy in the game. And then midway through you fight that kaiju, like, shmup boss that's really tall. And then nothing is as big as that. And then even at the real end of, you know, all the different runs, they establish this tower, which is this huge overarching story, which is kind of a visual metaphor for potentially the plot, because the plot itself has had this you know, this thematic part of it that I don't want to spoil here and go into too much detail because I don't want to ruin it for the people. And it's all been about this central core narrative, and then at the end this tower turns up and thus does the answer that makes a lot of the game tie together. And you would think with such an escalation, with this creation of this big tower that's a platform to get to the moon of all places, that it would lead to, you know, something grand, something big, something bigger. But it doesn't. If anything, it becomes more personal, it becomes closer in a lot of ways. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the way they choose to do it seems kind of strange to me, because not only do you get 2 recycled bosses, but then you get the 2 recycled bosses stuck together to form a new boss, which is less interesting than they were when they were separate. So it just seems like I don't know, you know, some of the final area bosses are worse than some of the earlier game bosses because they're just not interesting. They don't seem to correlate with what's happening in the game, and they don't offer anything more than what you think they would. And then when you compare that directly to Platinum's other games, at the end of the Wonderful 101, you are in the solar system fighting against a giant king robot in a giant robot firing rainbow lasers of earth-saving doom in the most ridiculous escalation ever. But once again, that's Hideki Kamiya. This is not. So maybe it's because of him. Like, I would quote Bayonetta with the same kind of escalation structure leading towards ridiculousness, but that's Hideki Kamiya. This isn't. So this game kind of gives that illusion of building, but then never does. And it's almost the same with everything. A lot of the bosses are recycled same things, same attack patterns, same everything, so you fight them again, and there's just a little bit different narrative behind it, but it's still the same formula for the fight. And then all the interesting stuff is just kind of lost in the shuffle of all the narrative. So it doesn't really feel like, other than for plot reasons, that the gameplay goes anywhere. Which is not to say that there isn't fun to be had, and that it isn't an interesting journey, because I definitely think it is. I don't know, I expected more, in many ways. And it reminds me when I first played the trial, the demo for this game. Because, you know, at the end of it, once you'd finished doing that amazing fight in the air and smacking that robot with its own arm, and it was all crazy shmup, and then action, and then action, then shmup, and I just had this resounding excitement that, if we're doing this in the demo, imagine what we're going to do in the game. And then you realise you really don't do anything that's as exciting or as interesting as that in the entire game. That's it. That's the peak of the fun. And there's all these opportunities for the game to escalate beyond that, and it never does. It's almost, you know, it's like all build-up and then no climax, for a nice Bayonetta term. And I find that to be really disappointing, personally. I don't know if you do. If you agree with it, you might disagree with it. And there's one moment where I got really excited and it ended up being for naught. There's a sequence where you control the flyer and you're in the orbit of the Earth. You're in space, you see the Earth, it looks awesome, it's the biggest view you've seen in the game at that point. And I thought there was going to be a massive space battle, or like a super climactic, you know, Azura's Wrath tier, ridiculous boss fight or something, because I anticipated that it would escalate that way. It would escalate to, like, character action inside of the flights set that the Yoras have, you know, those mechs that you use. On that kind of scale, against a big bad boss. And I expected it to be shattering planets, shattering solar systems. I expected it to be of that same Platinum flavour. And then you didn't do anything. You flew towards Earth, and then it just cut back to everything you'd already seen. And it felt like me like such a waste, because in other areas of the game, there is a sense of escalation. There is a sense of raising everything up. Look at the enemies. The enemies begin as almost kind of passive automatons that you just crush and juggle and combo and do all your fancy weapon swapping and phantom weapon spinning and all that kind of stuff. And then gradually they improve their armaments, they get better tools, they get more moves. And then by the end of the game, they're like malformed, crazy, cannibalistic, and they have EMPs that stop you from doing core components of gameplay, which sounds like a really endearing mechanic and turns out to be a fucking nightmare, which I hate, and I can't wait to hate speech that video when it happens, because that part of the game is miserable. But it really does give a sense of the enemies getting more dangerous and improving and iterating. And I've seen a lot of people complain that there's not that many enemies in the game, and I think that that's kind of myopic of them. I don't think it's a slight on the game at all. This game has a lot of enemies. It's the same enemies, but they're iteratively different, and they're not iterative in just simple palette swaps. They are fundamentally different on a gameplay level, and that's the most you can ask of anything. Sure, did I expect to fight more? All kinds of different dudes? Definitely. I thought there would be way more than there is, but when you look at it without your own bias and you see what they've done, there's like 5 to 6 variants on almost every enemy type. More so the smaller ones and the bigger ones than anything else, but there are still iterations of them. There are ones that come electrified, ones that come spiked, ones that come with extra movesets, different moves, different weapons. Like, when you start adding them up, they do stack up, and originally it does look like there's not that much to kill. And then you see some of the more novelty enemies that don't turn up a lot, like the Yorha units and things like that. Just different takes, different expectations. Like, there's a lot of enemies in this game, when you think about it. It's that they're not that vastly different that it's easy to just kind of group them all together. And the game definitely needed more, I think. That just seems to make sense. There are enemies that they've used in certain areas that you just don't see anywhere else, and you don't see them that often, which makes you wonder why they're even there. This is a good example of one. This is a leg variant on the tall walking dude, and he is like 8 levels higher than me. I think he's 25. This guy's really dangerous, and he's dangerous because, you know, when his legs are electrified, they're an active hitbox the entire time. If you don't take away the electrification, just trying to attack him will get you killed. This move here has an interesting box on it when it comes to how it hurts you, so you can dodge it when you're nowhere near it and still get an evade off it. So you need to be careful with him. But the good news is, he doesn't really have any option for you. He does the jumping shockwave, which you can counter. He does the quick spinning attack, which you can dodge away from. As long as he's not electrified, he's a pretty simple boss if you're patient and you pick your shots. And that's all I'm doing here, guys. Nothing too interesting. Here's his crazy spin move that looks great. Fantastic to look at, not so great to be part of. Massive lingering hitbox and all that dust and smoke making it impossible to really see when anything connects. Which it doesn't really matter because it never connects honestly anyway. But there's 2 variants of those enemies. I think there might even be 3. And that's not mentioning the gold variant, which I suppose you could say is 4. Because I think there's a leg version, I think there's an arm version, and I think there's a leg and arm version because they can swap between at a certain point. I've seen them do it. And then there's the gold version, which makes no sense at all. He's a low level, but he has incredible defense and incredible life, and they take like an hour to kill, and they don't give you anything interesting, so I don't know what the point of them is exactly. This is a new weapon. It's a wooden stick. I popped it on because I'd never got it before. This was something I just messed around and found by jumping on all the pillars. It's got the same moveset as the sword. I was hoping for something different, but it's just a different weapon for the sword, which is cool if you want that. And there's me falling off. And there's me showing you the environmental damage when you fall off. Takes a little chunk off your life, doesn't kill you. Very fair. But we can say there's 4 types of that enemy. And then you have the spinny guy, which I think the spinny guy has 2 variants. He has the standard variant, and then he has the variant where he's got bombs on the top of him. And then you have the standard dudes, where there's the mask version, there's the unmasked version, there's the priest version, there's the cannibalistic version, and then all the different weapons and iterations of those. So there's like 8 or 9 different versions of those guys. You know, there's a decent amount of enemies, it's just they're all so thematically similar that's a criticism that you're going to see. For instance, you're going to see different types of enemies here, and they're more cosmetically different than anything else because they have weapons we've seen before, but technically they are a new enemy. They're wearing, I mean, this, oh my god, the spear guy. We need to talk spear guy. Spear guy needs his own video. So, this is a side-on section full of spear enemies, and there's no checkpoint here until you hit the save point just before the boss fight. It is a long sequence that introduces a new enemy type that's in this next zone coming up, and I'm going to completely skip him because I just want to get to the save point. But here's a new enemy. Kind of like a satyr, weird kicky kangaroo dude. But the spear dude, right. This enemy type, not only does it have a 3-hit combo that cannot be escaped unless you wear a very specific chip, because it stun locks you to death. At any range, when you're inside of it, you just can't do anything. That needs to be avoided. I don't have to tell you why. And then there is the jump attack. So if you're at distance at any time, he will do a lunging, ridiculous jump attack that has more range than a sniper rifle and doesn't have to touch you to kill you. On my blind playthrough, I died as this dude drew the spear back before he even thrusted it forward, because if he had have thrust it forward, I would have been in the vicinity of its incredible hitbox. But I wasn't at the time until after I was dead. And this thing has hit me through walls, it's hit me through trees, it's hit me through all kinds of pieces of geometry. It is a move you cannot sleep on. So whenever you see a big guy with a spear, the little guys don't do the running attack, but they'll still stun lock you, so be careful. But the big guy, if you see the taller dude with a spear, you need to hook him. You need to get as close to him as you can and kill him instantly. Kill him as quickly as you can, because if you ignore him, he's going to hit you off screen and do incredible damage. And it's a move that you can spam dodge and get lucky, and you can spam dodge and still get hit. It is the most broken move in this game. Like, the spear is straight up ridiculous. A stun lock that you need a chip to get out of, and a running attack which is god tier and redonkulous. I don't need to say anymore. It's bad, don't suffer to it, ignore it, it's trash. Like, just straight up, you've got to kill him. Just kill him first and get on with your life. But right here is a secret blacksmith. He's on the platform below the one I'm stood on now. I made a video to show where he was, and I'm going to show you where he is in this, because I'm going to go and check my weapons to see if anything can be upgraded. I think I'm going to do that now. So Masamune is the only blacksmith in the game, I believe, who can increase weapons to level 4. Level 4 is the highest they go. Most of them get incredible attributes when they get that high. You want to experiment with the attributes that you like so that you can pick the arsenal you want to use. And here's the conversation with him. I kind of wished that the blacksmiths did more in this game, because there's a lot of potential that could have happened that kind of didn't. It would have been nice if you could embed chips into the weapon, and it changed its moveset, changed its properties, changed its abilities. It would have been nice to have that kind of control, but as it stands, it's just raw damage inflation, and it's passive abilities on the weapons themselves. It would have been nice to have a little bit more, but alas, we don't. So I think I'm going to sell some stuff here so that I can get these last upgrades. I've got a lot of fish, and anything that says can be exchanged for money means that it will not be used for almost anything else, so you can sell it without worrying about losing anything. And that's one of the qualities that this game has, I think, because in a lot of games, especially games where you pick a lot of stuff up, they don't do the best way of getting across to the player what is important and what is not. Everybody remember Final Fantasy 13? Where there was an achievement for getting, I think, all the accessories, and you had to have them in your inventory. Did any of you figure out a good way of getting money early on was to sell your inventory that you weren't using? Because I did, and I sold like a bangle that I couldn't get again, so I never got that achievement, and I was really fucked off about that. Remember Final Fantasy 12? Picking up chests that fucked you? Weird shit. Games don't get across what is precious and what is not. They just don't. There's no true way to understand what is the best way to approach a lot of things. Some games are great for it, and this is one of them. The fact that they've put that little signifier on there to tell the player, you can get rid of this without worrying, is a great thing. How many people in Witcher 3 hoarded junk because they didn't realise it had zero value? There was nothing it could be used for except to be sold. So there was people running around with like 40 kilograms of junk on their character, not realising it, because they were afraid to get rid of something that could have been important later on. And it's just a simple piece of communication between developer and player to say, don't worry about it, get rid of this. You can do it in a tutorial, you can do it in an item description. It shouldn't be difficult, but it's surprising how often it gets overlooked. But moving forward here, guys, we're going to be coming across the boss of this level. It is a fight against A2, but before we can do that, we have to take on an incredible gauntlet of forest protectors. And the funny thing is you can completely skip this, but I recommend you don't, because these guys have a tendency to drop severed a severed item, which is a good upgrade resource, and some of the top tier items for upgrade. And if you want to get those level 4 upgrades, these guys are hopefully going to help you do that. So just use whatever combat that you enjoy. At this point, if you have Shockwave, you're going to be laughing, but I don't think I do. So Shockwave. I've mentioned I don't have it just yet, but you can get it if you go to the right places. We're going to be getting it later on, so don't you worry, but in an instance such as this, the Shockwave would be constantly blasting and pushing enemies away from me, so I would have full control over this room in a lot of ways. You just have to be careful of one thing. The first attack on the sword that I'm using moves 2B forward quite a lot. It's kind of a stepping slash that has a lot of locking properties because of the soft lock. So when you initiate it, she moves forward like a good couple inches on the screen, and you can put yourself in range of danger. And because the enemies will start up those windmill animations where they spin their arms and they run towards you for about 5 seconds, all of that is a hitbox. So if you step forward in your attack and you don't interrupt it, you'll take a hit. You'll trade with it every time. It's the same thing that happens when you try to do any kind of counterattack after a perfect evade against certain animations. Certain animations get set up so perfectly that your counterattack will be counterattacked naturally just by how long the animation you try to challenge is. And there's a reason on Bayonetta where when you activate Witch Time, it turned off all the enemies' hitboxes, because you can't take damage during Witch Time. In this game, that doesn't exist because they didn't have the foresight to make it function like that. And I don't know why it's that way, but it is, and you need to respect it. Because I tweeted the other day, and I don't imagine most people who follow me on Twitter are watching this one potentially. Maybe you are, which is awesome, it's nice to have you here, but there's a lot of people on there and everybody has different tastes, so I try to speak in my walkthroughs as if I'm talking to a new person every time, while trying not to condescend to the people who are return viewers. But you can counter off a move, get the Witch Time, which is called Overclock in this game, and then you can go and try to attack and trade damage with the very move you dodged to get the slow motion with, because its hitbox is still active. And that is a fundamental failure of understanding how that mechanic should feature. I don't know why it works that way, it's preposterous. There are bosses that have full body animations that are all hurtboxes, and if you counter it and try and attack, you will die. It's broken, it's stupid, and it shouldn't exist. But this is A2, so immediately start by shooting her to get her to dodge towards you. Once she does that, she'll fall from the top of the screen directly downwards, and if you time it correctly, you can do a launcher, catch her into the air, do a full combo, end with Mirage, and then knock her to the other side of the room where you can start the loop. That's the launch, that's the catch, that's the combo, that's the ender. Other side of the room, here comes the launch attempt. Successful launch because she let me. Full combo into Mirage, into knock, into ender, into attempted launch again, but she recovered so I get distance. Dodge the attack, wait for her to come, launch her, into combo, missed it that time unfortunately. Be careful coming down because she has a lot of moves that can hit you at incredible range. Shoot her to make her piss off and then she'll run away, or if she does that, use the counter to launch her, do the full combo into ender, go towards the corner, go for the launcher or the Mirage. The Mirage will stun her as well. Be careful of that. That was a counter launcher that she did. You can dodge the move where she dashes towards you and get the slow motion off it if you want to, but you don't have to. Full combo, Mirage, knocks her to the wall, catch her with a launch, and that's the end of the fight. Looked easy, didn't it? And admittedly on this run, it took me 2 or 3 attempts to get it. When I come back as 9S, that took me about 20 attempts because I can't get a consistent launch on her that time, and that time she let me do it. So the real difficulty of that fight is whether or not she lets you get away with any of the shenanigans you try, because she can just decide not to be launched and just fuck you up. It's kind of rough. But thank you for watching, and you take care now.